It was October 1st, and that crisp autumn air had arrived. Everything felt like fall, which has always been my favorite season. It was the first fall that my boyfriend Carter and I were living together in our new place. I thought it would be nice to surprise him by decorating the house with fall and Halloween decorations before he came home from work one day. It felt like a sweet idea. I picked up a few items from a nearby Marshall's, along with some other stores, and I also browsed different apps and websites, especially Facebook Marketplace. I typed in fall decorations, and one listing immediately stood out. It showed a large green plastic container filled with various fall decorations. I opened the listing for more information, and it basically said everything had to go. The entire container of fall-themed decorations was being sold at a low price, only $20. It seemed like an amazing deal if that whole container was actually full. At the bottom of the listing, it also mentioned that the seller was getting rid of other items and clearing out the house, encouraging people to check his profile. So I did. There was a strange mix of items. There was a supposedly brand new iPhone listed for $700, some pieces of women's clothing, and Christmas decorations. There were more listings, but I did not go through all of them. The profile itself was pretty minimal. Most things were private. The name on the account was Cody, and the profile picture showed a close-up of a gray trucker hat on a man, but his face was hidden under the brim. The cover photo was just a blurry image of a lake. I sent him a message, and he responded right away. I asked what kind of decorations were inside the container, and he said there were all kinds. He mentioned tableware, outdoor decorations, and more. I got excited and told him I could come pick it up that same day if he was available. He said he would be home later, closer to 9 p.m. after work. He sent me the address. I checked it on Google Maps Street View. It was not the nicest town, but the house itself looked normal. There were 2 cars in the driveway in the image, and the lawn looked well maintained. I agreed to go, but I asked my friend Sally to come along just to be safe. I picked Sally up from across town, and we headed toward Cody's house. The drive took about half an hour, and we spent the time catching up. When we exited the highway and entered the town, Sally started joking about how sketchy the area seemed. It was partly playful, but there was some truth to it, since everyone kind of knows the town does not have the best reputation. It was dark, so we mostly saw streetlights, traffic signals, and a few storefronts. As we got closer, my phone lit up and vibrated in the cup holder. At the next red light, I checked it and saw messages from Cody. He wrote that when we arrived, we could just come inside. I showed Sally, and she reacted immediately. We both agreed that it felt uncomfortable, and we decided we would knock or ring the doorbell instead. When we pulled up, there were no cars in the driveway, which was surprising. There were faint lights inside, barely visible through the closed blinds. I messaged him saying we had arrived and asked if he could come to the front. As we sat there waiting, both of us noticed at the exact same time that the blinds on one of the windows moved slightly, like someone was watching us. Then they quickly closed again. A few seconds later, the front door opened, and Cody messaged back saying he was at the door and that we could come in. The whole situation felt unsettling, and I was relieved that Sally was with me. We got out of the car and walked toward the door. Before getting too close, I called out his name a few times, but there was no reply. Sally quietly suggested we should leave. I stepped a little closer and called his name again, louder this time, but still nothing. I turned to Sally and whispered that we should go. We started heading back to the car when suddenly a man's voice called out from inside, saying he was there. We turned around and saw him standing in the doorway, but only partially visible, like he was leaning around it. He gestured for us to come in. We hesitated, but turned back and walked toward the entrance. As I got closer, he opened the door fully and then stepped out of sight. We walked up the steps and entered, keeping the door open behind us. Immediately, we were hit with a strong smell, something like a clean cotton scent mixed with something unpleasant. We heard quick, heavy footsteps moving away into another room, followed by his voice telling us to come inside. His voice was very deep and intimidating. I made sure Sally stayed right beside me as we stepped into the next room. What we saw felt strange. It was a dim living room with a dull pinkish-red carpet and very old furniture. The smell there was even worse. It smelled like something had died. In the center of the room sat a red container with a green lid. The man stood next to it. This was the first time I clearly saw him, and he did not seem friendly at all. He told me to come over and open the container. I noticed right away that it did not match the one from the listing. The color and shape were completely different. I asked him to open it instead. He replied that I was no fun. That comment made both Sally and me slowly step backward toward the door. Then he lifted the lid. A strong, horrible smell rushed out. We immediately turned and ran out without looking back until we reached the car. Sally kept urging me to hurry. By the time I started the car, the front door was already closed. I do not know if he was watching us again through the window. We left as fast as we could. We never saw what was inside that container, but it definitely was not decorations. Later, I told Carter everything. He asked for the address, and I told him not to go there. He said he would not, that he just wanted to look it up. So I gave it to him. The next day, he came home later than usual and told me he had actually stopped by the house. An older woman answered and insisted she lived there alone. He believed me, though, because I showed him the messages, including the address. When he checked property records, the house was listed under a woman in her late 60s. It was one of the most disturbing and confusing experiences I have ever had. Since then, I avoid going to people's homes when buying things online. It was back in 2019. I remember it clearly because that was the year I was living by myself in Asheville, North Carolina. I had moved there for a temporary job, and it gave me a reason to experience living alone for the first time. I was 22, fresh out of college, and had an apartment right in downtown. Most places I needed were within walking distance, but I also had my car for when I felt like going farther out or leaving town altogether. One thing I really loved about Asheville and North Carolina overall was the huge number of hiking trails. I had explored quite a few nearby, but one spot I had not visited yet was DuPont State Forest. One day, I decided to check it out. The drive from Asheville was just under an hour. It was a random Wednesday in October. The leaves had started turning colors, making it an ideal day for hiking. I did not have work, and since it was a weekday, I figured the trails would be mostly empty. When I reached the parking area, I found the entrance to one of the trails and began walking. After a while, I noticed how peaceful everything felt. I seemed to be completely alone. The sky was overcast, and it had rained quite a bit that week. That actually made me more excited, since the trail led to waterfalls called Triple Falls and High Falls, which would look even better after heavy rain. It only took about 0.4 miles to reach Triple Falls, and it was an incredible sight. As a fun fact, a scene from the Hunger Games was filmed there. I sat on a rock for a while, taking pictures and recording a few videos. At some point, I noticed a woman standing off the trail in the woods. She was staring directly at me. I gave a small wave to be polite, but she simply turned around and slowly walked deeper into the trees until I could not see her anymore. I did not think much of it. I had just started hiking and was not tired yet, so I did not stay seated for long. I got back on the trail and continued upward. I avoided climbing on the waterfall rocks since they were extremely slippery. Eventually, I reached the higher section known as High Falls. I took more photos and videos there and sat on another dry rock. Then I felt a strange sense of familiarity when I spotted that same woman again in the woods near the trail. She was staring at me just like before. This time, I did not wave. Instead, I looked down at my phone, pretending I had not noticed her. After about 10 seconds, I glanced back up, and she was gone. If I had to estimate, she looked around 55 years old. She had short, grayish-blonde hair from what I could tell, though she was always far enough away that I could not be certain. I did not see which direction she went, but whichever way it was, I preferred going the opposite way. I kept moving along the trail until I reached another landmark, a covered bridge. I stopped again to take a scenic video and a few pictures. After drinking some water, I looked toward the far end of the bridge, back in the direction I had come from. There she was again. I was sure she had not been there moments earlier while I was taking photos. I had not heard anyone approach either. Yet there she stood, staring at me as if I had done something wrong. At that point, I felt more irritated than anything. I started walking toward her and said, "Excuse me," but she immediately turned and began walking away. The speed at which she moved, especially for someone her age, felt unsettling. For a moment, I even wondered if she might need help, but I did not push myself to follow her. Instead, I leaned against the bridge for a few minutes before deciding to head back. I had already been hiking for about 45 minutes, and it would take roughly the same amount of time to return to my car. On the way back down, heading in the direction the woman had gone, I passed a younger woman walking her dog. I stopped her and asked if she had seen an older woman nearby. She said she had not. Trying to make conversation, I explained how I kept noticing this woman appearing out of nowhere, staring at me, then disappearing again. She laughed and said that was really strange. We both found it a bit funny, and not wanting to take up her time, I continued on my way. As I walked back, I felt slightly on edge, half expecting to see that woman again somewhere in the background. But the trail stayed quiet. I passed one more person who smiled and nodded, and then I made it back to my car without any trouble. Later that day, I went on a date with a girl I had been seeing. We went to our favorite local bar, had some pumpkin spice beers, and watched baseball. I told her about the woman from the trail, and she found it entertaining since it did sound kind of odd. After that, I went home. That night, something unusual happened. I rarely wake up in the middle of the night. I am usually a very heavy sleeper, so waking up suddenly in the dark felt strange. As I was coming to, I heard something near the foot of my bed. I looked up and saw the silhouette of a woman standing there. It felt like everything inside me dropped. I started screaming as loudly as I could, probably loud enough for neighbors to hear even through closed windows. I scrambled backward against the headboard, trying to get as far away as possible from the figure. Then she simply turned and walked out of the room. I stopped screaming, trying to catch my breath and slow my racing heart. I switched on the lamp and shouted, asking who was there. There was no response, only silence. I grabbed the knife from my nightstand and got out of bed. I turned on every light in the apartment as I moved through it. No one was there. Not in the closets, not behind furniture, not under the bed, so I called my father. I did not know what else to do. I just needed to tell someone what had happened. He answered grudgingly, and after I explained everything, he suggested that I must have hallucinated it while still half asleep. He said I was probably not fully awake, and my mind could have been playing tricks on me. Deep down, I knew he was probably right, but that did not make what I saw feel any less real or terrifying. Then I mentioned the woman from the trail and how the figure at the foot of my bed looked just like her. He said that only supported his explanation that my brain had likely pulled a familiar image from earlier in the day. Somehow, I managed to fall back asleep that night, though I blocked my bedroom door with my dresser just in case. 2 days later, my mom told me that her sister in Germany had passed away. I had never met my aunt. She had been distant from my mom and had not left Germany in over 25 years. My mom and uncle flew there for the funeral. When she returned, She showed me a prayer card with my aunt's photo on it. The moment I saw it, I felt that same sinking feeling all over again. She looked exactly like the woman I had seen on the trail and at the foot of my bed. The story unsettled my entire family, especially because I had told my dad about everything before we even knew about her passing. I was raised Catholic, but after confirmation, I never really considered myself deeply religious. Still, this experience gave me chills and made me seriously question what I actually believe. My friend Carlos and I have always had a habit of getting into dumb situations together. We had known each other since we were kids, around 10 years old, and by the time we turned 21, we ended up sharing a place. We stayed in Brunswick, Georgia, the town where we both grew up. It was a small coastal town with its ups and downs, but overall, it was not a bad place to spend your childhood. Still, once we hit our 20s, it started to feel dull. But that is not really the point. While living there, we all knew about this one house that looked completely out of place compared to the others. It seemed like it belonged to another era. It had been abandoned for years, and we and our friends used to invent stories about what might have happened there. It was the middle of October, and everyone was getting into the Halloween spirit. People were going to haunted attractions, corn mazes, and doing all kinds of seasonal stuff. One Friday night, we figured it would be fun to break into that house and take a look around. After we got home from work, we grabbed a couple of baseball bats, picked up some fast food and beer, and drove over there. We parked far down the road so we would not draw attention. The houses in that area were spaced out with large properties, so the chances of getting caught snooping were pretty low. We each took a couple of beers and stuffed them into our backpacks. Looking back, I have no idea why we thought we would drink in there, but we also slid the bats into our bags so we would not be seen walking around at night, holding them like troublemakers. We walked quietly down the street, talking in low voices. It took less than 5 minutes to reach the house. That part of the street was extremely dark. This house and the one across from it had no lights on, and there were no street lights either. Any light at all came from a few distant homes. From that point, we relied on the flashlights we brought. The front yard was patchy with dirt, and the grass that remained was overgrown with weeds everywhere. We decided to go around to the backyard to find a way in, since trying the front seemed like a bad idea. Surprisingly, the back door was unlocked. The place was not boarded up at all. The windows were intact too. Still, everyone knew the house had been abandoned for a long time. We stepped inside. Without our flashlights, it would have been impossible to move around. The house was actually larger than some nearby homes, but the inside felt tight and crowded. There were many rooms, but each one was small, which gave the place a maze-like feel. Carlos wandered off into another room, leaving me by myself for a moment. From somewhere else, I heard him call out that there was still furniture all over the place. I answered that it must have been abandoned quickly. Everything looked very old, like something you would find in your grandparents' house, but untouched for years. I kept exploring the first floor until I reached a narrow hallway with several doors leading to bedrooms. I opened one and found it incredibly cramped. The bed took up almost the entire space. I checked the dresser drawers, but they looked like someone had already gone through them. The closet was the same. Anything left behind besides the furniture seemed like useless junk. I heard Carlos say he was heading upstairs, and I told him okay. We were speaking just loud enough to hear each other. After checking another equally small bedroom, I went back into the hallway. There were 2 more doors. One led to a bathroom, and the other opened to a long staircase going down into a basement. I decided to go down. As I stepped onto the stairs, each one creaked loudly under my weight. About halfway down, I noticed a faint light coming from below. I turned off my flashlight and saw that the glow was still there. That should have been my cue to leave, but I kept going. I tend to make bad decisions, like someone who would not last long in a horror movie. I continued down in darkness. When I reached the bottom, I peeked past the wall, separating the stairs from the rest of the basement. I saw what was giving off the light. 2 tall candles were sitting on a table, but that was not what caught my attention first. Next to them was a rocking chair, and it was moving. Someone was sitting in it, facing away from me. All I could see clearly was a hand resting on the arm of the chair. I knew I had to leave immediately. I started back up the stairs as quietly as I could, though every creak made me tense up. Halfway up, I looked back and still saw the dim candlelight, so I kept going carefully. Near the top, one step made a particularly loud noise. I froze, clenching my teeth. Then I finished climbing and reached the top. When I turned to close the door, I saw that the basement was completely dark. The idea that the candles had been put out made my skin crawl. I shut the door quietly and moved through the house as silently as possible until I found the stairs leading up. I stood at the bottom and softly called Carlos's name. No answer. I started going up, repeating his name, but still nothing. When I reached the top, I told him to stop messing around because there was someone in the basement and we needed to leave. That got his attention. He stepped out of a dark room and asked if I was serious. I told him I would explain outside, but I was not joking. He followed me downstairs. At that point, I was less concerned about being quiet and more focused on getting out. As we headed toward the back door, we passed the hallway with the basement door, and both of us saw a man's silhouette standing there. We stopped sneaking and just ran. I kept saying go as we rushed outside and sprinted to my car. We reached it in about 30 seconds, already out of breath. I backed out and drove us away from that street. During the drive, I told him everything I saw. All he could say was what the hell over and over. He was just as shocked as I was. So no, I do not think anyone officially lived there, but I am sure someone was staying in that basement. Who it was, I have no idea, and honestly, it does not matter. I never went anywhere near that place again.